This story starts in the summer of 1990 in the Dallas suburbs. As a child, which I still am today, I was very whimsical and didn't pay much attention to anything that didn't concern me in the moment. It was a summer day, and I was playing in the backyard. My mom had to run some errands, so of course I stalled and waited till she was walking out the front door, until I finally managed to drag ass and join her. "Did you shut the sliding door?" she asked. Not remembering or caring at all, I said yes, and about our day we went. We arrived back home early evening around 6. As we entered the house, the sliding door was wide open. Of course, my mom scolded me on this one, and me, truly not remembering whether I apologized or not, went on about my business. As the night winded down, my mom tucked me in and then went downstairs to run a bath. So like any 5-year-old, the last thing I did was go to sleep. As I lay on my bed, playing with micro machines and making goofy kid noises, I felt my bed move slightly. This caused me to immediately pause and look around, but then quickly dismiss it and go on about my usual kid business. A few minutes later, though, the end of my bed lifted up and then immediately slammed back down. Of course, I did what any 5-year-old would do and screamed like a fucking banshee. Then in the dark room, my bed started moving and a shadow slowly tried to rise from the foot of my bed. I stood up and jumped like an Olympic champion all the way to the door and met my mom in the middle of the stairs. As I hysterically told my mom what had just happened, we ran into the kitchen and quietly called 911. We kept it short and ran to the car and waited outside for the police. As we were waiting, we could see from the outside of my house the upstairs light turning on, then the hallway, and then the stairway. After a minute, the police came screeching into my driveway. They flew in the house and searched it, but to no avail. The cops then told us that as we came home that afternoon, we probably walked in as the intruder was trying to rob the place. Although nothing was touched or disturbed, needless to say, I didn't sleep in my room for a month. And now, every time I get home at night, I always turn on every light and check every crevice. Thanks a lot, creepy burglar. I hope we do meet again, because next time, I will beat the shit out of you. I'm a 21-year-old girl, and I was around 7 or 8 when this story took place. I grew up in the suburbs in a large city in Ohio. My neighborhood was like any stereotypical suburb, really safe, lots of kids, and all the parents knew each other. You get the idea. So let me explain the layout to my house, for clarification in the story. So when you walk in the front door, there's a living room which my parents used as their office, and then the kitchen is straight ahead. Right off the kitchen to the left is the master bedroom. Near the front door, you go down about 8 steps and we had a finished basement, which my sister and I used as our play/TV room. Then we had a traditional second floor, which had 2 bedrooms for me and my sister. So one night my parents decide to go out with some friends of my dad. So it's me, my sister Rachel, who was 9, and my dad's friend's son, Ben. I believe he was around 12 or 13 at the time. I remember him complaining to his dad, saying he was too old for a babysitter. But whatever, my usual babysitter Kristen was watching all of us. She was about 17 at the time, and has been watching Rachel and I since we were toddlers. So the night starts out fine. Kristen ordered us pizza, and we were all watching TV in the basement. We had a large, sectional L-shaped couch that we were all sitting on. It was against the wall that backed up to 2 large windows, which faced into the backyard. Since our basement was not a traditional basement, you could clearly see out to the backyard through the windows. So, we're all watching a movie. I remember it was the new Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, as this was around 2002 to 2003. We had been in the basement a while. It was around 10 p.m., and I hear what sounds like someone walking around upstairs on the second floor. The ceiling in the basement lined up to where our 2 bedrooms were on the second floor. I look at everyone else, and they heard it too. My house is older, but I still know what the sounds of people walking around sound like, as opposed to just old house noises. We did have a large Labrador retriever, so I figured she was just walking around upstairs, and we all decide to ignore it. About 2 minutes later though, I go upstairs to the kitchen to get some water, and I notice my dog sleeping on the couch in my parents' office area. She had obviously been there for a while, as she was in a deep sleep. At this point, my 7-year-old self is freaking out, wondering who the fuck was walking around upstairs. Also, I want to point out that a month earlier, when Kristen babysat me and Rachel, she let us watch the original Halloween, so I had been convinced since then that Michael Myers was hiding around every corner of my house, waiting to kill me. But on with the story. I tell Kristen that the dog is asleep on the first floor, so it couldn't have been her walking around. This made her a little nervous, but she told me that the house was old and just made weird noises, and just to continue watching TV and not to worry about it. 15 minutes went by, and we heard it again. We put the TV on mute and listened to the silence. The walking continues for about 10 seconds after we mute the TV, and then it stopped. At this point, we were all about to shit ourselves, but being the dumb kids we were, we decided to go upstairs and see what the fuck was going on. Because looking for an intruder in your house always ends well, right? We take the dog with us. We go into me and Rachel's room, and we don't see anything. But all of us were on edge. We had all heard the same thing, so we decided to go downstairs to my parents' room. The plan was to lock the door and keep it together until my parents and Ben's parents got back. My parents' was the only room that we had not thought to check, since it was on the first floor. We opened the door and turned on the lights, only to find the window wide open. It was early November in Ohio. There was no way my parents had left the window open intentionally. At this point, I wanted to cry. After checking out the room and determining no weirdos were hiding under the bed, Kristen closed the window, locked the door, and pushed a chair under the doorknob. Kristen decided that it would be best if we just called my parents and told them to come home. Why we didn't call 911? I still don't know today. I don't think any of us wanted to believe someone would actually break into my house. She picked up the phone, and there was no dial tone. This wasn't unusual, as the phone in my parents' room was very old and frequently didn't work. It was one of those old phones you had to dial by twirling your finger on a circle. This was also before every 17-year-old had a phone, so we relied on landlines. Ben offered to run down to the basement and grab the other phone. He ran downstairs and was literally back in 15 seconds and looked like he was about to pee himself. He said when he went to grab the phone, he looked out the window that looked straight into our backyard and saw a person just standing there about 50 feet away from the window, looking straight into our house, not moving. Kristen then decided to call 911. She clicks the green button to call, but there was no dial tone. Someone was messing with the phones. Kristen brought up the idea of making a run for her car, but no one wanted to go outside after what Ben saw. At this point, it was just barely past 11 p.m. My parents had said that they would be home between midnight and 1 a.m., so we decide to wait it out and try not to shit ourselves. We turn on the TV in my parents' room really loudly to drown out any weird noises and to try to stay calm, knowing the door was locked and having a large dog with us along with a baseball bat my dad kept under the bed. My parents ended up coming home earlier than expected, as they started to worry when they couldn't get a hold of us by phone to check in. We told my parents what had happened, and we ended up calling the police and filing a report. Since we lived in a safe neighborhood, things like this were not a normal occurrence. When the police went out to investigate the phone issue, they found out that the phone line had been cut. There were also around 4 or 5 cigarette butts on the ground near the window that looked into the basement. Not very far from where we had been eating and watching TV, we could clearly be seen through the curtain sitting on the couch. No one in my family smokes. Whoever broke in or tried to break in had clearly been watching us for a long time and knew that my parents weren't home. We never found out if someone was actually inside our house. The police searched all the rooms and nothing was missing or looked out of place. But they did discover that the windows in me and Rachel's rooms weren't locked. It was possible that the man broke in through my parents' bedroom and then escaped out the second-story window. The drop was only about 10 feet, so it wasn't impossible. The police took all of this extremely seriously and patrolled my street for the next week. They never found the person who Ben saw, but the incident stayed with me for a long time. From then on, I was always terrified to stay home by myself until I was almost 16, and I made my parents buy a thicker curtain for the basement so no one could see into the house. I'm now a 21-year-old college junior, and I still get freaked out whenever I have to stay in my apartment alone. I still wonder to this day what the hell that person was doing and what their intentions were. I'm not a religious person, but I thank God that my parents had the good sense to come home when they did. Who knows what would have happened if they had decided to stay out any longer. I am, and have always been, a very small girl, standing at 4'11", full grown, now at 27, and I have always been able to pass as being much younger than I really am, especially if I'm not wearing makeup. When I was a small child of about 7 or 8, my father bought a little cabin in a town in Texas called Livingston. I believe the specific area within Livingston was called Onalaska. The cabin was nothing remarkable at only 600 square feet. It was really just one giant room, a teeny kitchen the size of a normal bathroom, and a bathroom the size of a large closet, and a porch out front. The whole property consisted of 2 lots, so there was plenty of space, but the cabin itself was dingy. The whole area itself was a strange mix between backwoods and suburbia. It was a true neighborhood, but not the prim and neatly kept neighborhoods I was used to in suburbia Houston. Despite this, it became a very fond place for me, and some of my greatest memories in life are in that cabin, including my evacuation story from Houston during Hurricane Rita. But that's a story for another day. Anyways, around 11 to 12 years ago, my father bought me a 4-wheeler, and a little lake town suddenly became a lot bigger. I never went super far, but I definitely ended up going further than I ever had gone before. And it was quite common to see me zipping up and down the roads with a pile of neighborhood kids on the back of the 4-wheeler. That was usually only when we went down to the lake house on weekend visits. This was around 2001 to 2002, so cell phones were a thing, but it was still common for people not to have them. Usually I just had a beeper that I carried around, but with no phones at the lake house, my father gave me a walkie-talkie with a very long reach instead. Looking back on it, from a world of cell phones, this seems like a bad idea, but this was a small town, and we had spent so much time here that it felt completely safe. So one of these weekends, I was buzzing around my neighborhood like I usually did, and I stopped at this peninsula that overlooked the lake. This was a set of docks that us kids always came to when we wanted to swim. despite the very real threat of giant alligators, but being stupid kids, we never really thought of that. And I was overlooking the lake when my walkie-talkie buzzed to life. Naturally thinking it was my parents trying to reach me, I answered quickly. I couldn't quite make out what they said at first, so I tried confirming that it was my dad. This point in the neighborhood was a little ways away from the cabin, but I had reached my parents from this point before, so despite the fact that I couldn't quite recognize the voice, I just assumed it was my dad. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but it was off enough that I remember being slightly annoyed. I remember many garbled questions, and I answered many, but I never gave a straight answer that could hint who or where I was. Eventually the conversation started to drift in a way that I knew something was off, but I wasn't alarmed just yet, as my dad was notorious for pulling pranks on me and goofing around. I kept talking, stupidly. Finally though, the guy on the other end of the walkie-talkie made a comment, and for the life of me I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was enough for me to doubt it was anyone I knew. And this is when things took an extremely creepy turn. Bear in mind, I'd been talking to this guy pretending to be my father for a good 15 minutes, sitting on my four-wheeler on this peninsula.
I can see you. You should come take a ride in my boat,
he said in a very giddy tune. My father had a boat, but this was so out of character that it made me realize that this wasn't my father. Dad? You're not my dad, are you?
What are you talking about?
He said. If you can really see me, I started, feeling a bit peeved that this guy had been messing with me. What am I wearing? He paused for a second before the walkie-talkie cracked to life, and he said very clearly,
You're wearing an orange shirt, you have red hair, and you're sitting on a red four-wheeler right by the swim docks. Now I'll ask again. Why don't you come ride in my boat?
At this point, my eyes widened and my blood ran cold. This entire time, some strange guy that I didn't know had been watching me from God knows where. It took me maybe 10 seconds to look around wildly and then kick the four-wheeler up and race out of there so fast that the wheels had a hard time catching the ground. I remember the wheels spun out against the gravel beneath them, and when the four-wheeler finally started moving, little me had a hard time holding on. I floored it the entire way home and stopped in the middle of the yard and burst into the house. Obviously, the first thing I did was ask my parents if they had contacted me, which they hadn't. I was in such a panic that there was no way my dad wouldn't have confessed that it had been him. He was a practical joker, but he knew when the fun was over. I hate to think what might have happened had I continued sticking around the area, or if I hadn't figured out that it wasn't my dad pulling my leg. Nothing came of this incident though, and my childhood resumed as normal. Eventually the weekend visits stopped, but the story doesn't end there. During my parents' divorce, I moved to live in at the lake house permanently with my father, or at least until we could find something better. This was the only place we could go when he left my mother. My father had recently suffered from health issues, so I took up a job at a nearby gas station / tobacco barn to pay the bills. Thankfully, the lake house didn't have many bills, save for electricity, water, and internet, so my small salary was enough to keep us going. I only worked there for 3 months, but those 3 months were by far the creepiest I've ever experienced. Now, the part of the tobacco barn I worked in was strictly the gas side, and I was pretty much in a glass box with an opening to take people's money and give them cigarettes, which I couldn't have been more thankful for. Several times this man came to visit. He would leave to pump his gas, after staring at me awkwardly for a while. About the 4th or 5th time after I thought he had left, I hear a knock on the other side of the barn on the glass, and there he was, face pressed against the glass, staring at me with this wide, manic grin and waving at me with just his fingers. This was enough to send me running for my manager when he left, demanding to go on break before I peed myself. The last time I saw him, though, I will never forget. It has been etched into my mind so deeply that I doubt bleach could even scrub it away. He arrived as he usually did and ordered his gas. This time, however, he reached through the hole in the glass and grabbed my hand before I could put the cash away in the register. It wasn't a violent grab, but it was firm enough to keep me from pulling away. Being a very sheltered 18-year-old, all I could do was freeze in place.
I love you,
he said, refusing to let go of my hand. I simply stared at him, unnerved, alarm bells ringing throughout my head.
Say it.
What? I responded.
Say you love me.
Naturally, I just wanted this guy to go away, and being so freaking scared out of my mind at this point, I stammered and said it out of impulse. Maybe if I said it, he would just let me go and would leave. I love you, I said uneasily.
Call me if you need anything. What's my number?
He asked again. This threw me off completely, and the look on my face probably gave away my confusion, because he repeated himself, despite my stammering, that I didn't know. Finally he said something that made my blood run cold. I felt like I was going to throw up.
It's 911.
He then winked. It was then that I realized that this man was the sheriff deputy, the person I'd have to call if I got into any sort of trouble in town, the person I'd have to call if I had a medical emergency, or if someone even tried to rob me. And he wouldn't let go of my hand. I just nodded, trying to keep myself from shaking bad enough for him to feel it. He had never pulled up in a police car or anything, but when I talked to my manager, she confirmed that what he said was true. Once he did finally let go of me and went on his way, I retreated to the back and demanded to be relieved from the gas station area. I didn't care. I just didn't want to see this man ever again. Thankfully, we moved soon after, so I never had to. But I will never forget the leering grin that man gave me every single time he purchased gas. You'd think moving away would be the end of the story, but no. It got even worse when I went to college, and you wouldn't think that would be the case, considering I was in Galveston. I had needed to go to my counselor to discuss a few things, and this usually involved about 30 minutes of chit-chat, as me and my counselor had become close while I was attending school. During one of these chats, which my father had also been attending, due to him attending the same school and class as I was, in an effort to finally get his degree, I mentioned Onalaska, Texas, and how we owned a lake house up there. Instantly, the happy expression left my counselor's face. She informed me that she had been a social worker in that area for quite a few years. And suddenly, my childhood playground took on an extremely dark turn, and the sheriff at the gas station became a nightmare. Apparently the area was notorious for pedophilia, kidnappings, and other horrible incidents. Whole neighborhoods, including police officers, were in on it, and it was common for people trying to out the incidents to either go missing or be completely thrown out of the community through intimidation tactics. She proceeded to tell me of several cases she had worked on, including incidents of entire families being in on the whole mess. When I told her about the sheriff that I had encountered, she kinda paled and wouldn't tell me any more, except that she wasn't surprised. The conversation went on for over an hour and a half, but it was enough to make me never want to return to the small town that I had once called my childhood summer home, and I vowed to never ever bring any children I might have in the future there. So this happened a while back when I was in my early 20s. I was working at a little retail store in my town's mall. It was coming up to the end half of the day, and I don't know how I noticed it, but an older man, probably in his 50s, I'm not sure, had walked past my store 3 to 4 times. Not consecutively, just every now and again. Now I worked in those little costume jewelry stores, so it was odd for an older male to be walking past so many times. But I kind of didn't think anything of it. I don't even know how I picked up on it in the first place. Anyways, closing time came, and I had left to catch my bus home at around 6:30 p.m. I remember it was transitioning into winter because it was dark out by then. I'm a very paranoid person. I still live by the stranger danger rules. So even now, when I leave work, I make sure I change into an outfit that's less fashionable. I don't like drawing attention to myself in any way possible. Personally, I have had a past of attracting all the wrong kinds of attention for no reason at all. So as I said, I was waiting for my bus home, sitting by myself at the town center's bus terminal, and guess who walks past? The same older man. At this point, I kinda felt a little bit uneasy, but in my head, I tried to make reason prevail. As many people take buses all the damn time. My bus eventually showed up and I got on. And well, you can all guess who got on after me. I remember sitting in the seats facing inward, the ones for wheelchairs and prams, and he sat at the first seat above the steps. I remember staring forward and feeling his eyes burning into me. I kept trying to use my peripheral vision to see if he was looking at me, but I didn't want him to notice that I was looking at him. The whole bus ride, I waited to see if he got off before my stop. I was just thinking it was my over-anxious paranoid mind playing tricks on me. That is, until I pressed the button for my stop. I waited until the last possible second to press it, and as I stood up, he did too. I went to walk to the front door of the bus, and he exited the rear. At that moment, as soon as he stepped off, I sat back down again. I had no idea where the bus went after my stop, but honestly, I didn't fucking care. I will never forget the look on his face as the bus drove off. I have never seen such hate and anger in someone's face than I did through that window. His face is burnt into my memory like a photograph. It still absolutely terrifies me to this day. I have no idea what would have happened to me if I got off the bus at my stop that night, but I'm glad my paranoia was so intense that I didn't. So this happened back when I was 7 to 8 years old, but as a 22-year-old female, it's still fresh in my mind. My family lived in a small suburban town in North Texas. It was a weekend, and my mother had taken me and my younger brother, who was about 3 at the time, to the local mall for school clothes. I guess she was feeling particularly generous that day, because after clothes shopping, she promised to take us to the Disney store to pick out a toy. So we were in the Disney store, and I was looking at this Little Mermaid Barbie doll. It was one of those toys that you could take into the bath and its hair color changed. I was about to point it out to my mom when my brother started having a temper tantrum about something. Not sure what he was fussing for, but I remember her telling me just to wait a moment, and her turning her back to me while my brother started thrashing and trying to run off in the other direction. Since she was clearly preoccupied, I decided to just sit there and keep staring at the doll. That's when I noticed this man walk up beside me. He had noticed the doll that I was staring at and started asking a few questions. They went along the lines of what I liked so much about this doll and how many other dolls I had, and if I thought his little girl would like it as well. I was kind of only paying half attention. I was way too absorbed in staring at the toy to even bother looking at this man. Then I remember him asking how old I was. and the next thing I heard was my mother screaming my name as the guy picked me up and tried to fling me over his shoulders. After this, I panicked and screamed as the guy was running. I guess I had managed to kick and flail enough for him to lose his grip on me. So there I was on the mall floor, crying and confused as my mom scooped me up, little brother in tow, and screaming for security. Apparently the guy had just kept running, and he managed to get outside before they could call a lockdown on the building. We never heard any news back from the police on finding this guy, and I also never got my doll. This event was creepy and traumatizing, but it didn't end there. About 2 months later, we had a new family move in right across the street. I remember my mom commenting on how it was weird because the house had only been on the market for a week. The new neighbors were a couple that were slightly older than my parents with 2 little girls, one of which, Ashley, happened to be the same age as me. We became fast friends, and I was so excited when she ended up being put in the same class as me. My dad and Darren, Ashley's dad, had also become fast friends as most of the people in the neighborhood were elderly and were just happy to have someone to talk to. We had a bunch of barbecues together, but my mom always insisted that the family was weird and thought it was rude how Ashley's mom never joined us. Anyways, since Mr. Darren, which he insisted that I call him, worked from home and mom was always busy with my 3-year-old brother, it quickly became the norm that Darren would be the one to pick me up from school with Ashley. He would always joke that I was almost more of his daughter than my parents. He would always joke that I was always more his daughter than my parents, which was a comment I always shrugged off, and every day he'd ask me if I wanted to stay the night. I'd never spent the night at anyone else's house, but it sounded like fun, and eventually I'd convinced my mom to let me. The first weird thing that I'd noticed at dinner time was Ashley's mom. She was always really quiet and kept to herself, but I thought it was super weird that she had cooked dinner, set the table, and then promptly went to her bedroom. When I asked Ashley why her mom wasn't joining us, I was promptly shushed and asked not to talk about her mom. So we ate, watched a few movies, and then got ready for bed. The second weird thing I noticed is that when Ashley said it was bedtime, I said okay and headed towards her bedroom. When I started crawling into her bed, she laughed and asked what I was doing. "We don't sleep in here, silly. We sleep with Daddy." She then took my arm and pulled me into her father's room, which I noted was not the same room her mother slept in. So her big sister Ashley and myself crawled up in bed with Mr. Darren. I thought this was very weird, but I'd never slept at anyone else's house before, and just assumed different families did stuff differently. And before you ask, no, he didn't do anything to me. Or if he did, my mind has effectively blocked the memory. To my knowledge, it was just a normal night. Anyways, the next day came, and it was Saturday. I went home, and the weekend carried on like normal. Monday was when shit hit the fan, so to speak. It was lunchtime, and our class had just piled up into the lunchroom when I saw Mr. Darren sitting at our table and waving at us. Parents did visit during lunch on occasion, so it wasn't particularly weird. Him insisting to sit next to me instead of his own daughter and having his arm around me the entire time was weird. I started feeling very uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything, mainly because Ashley had been glaring daggers of jealousy at me the entire time, and I was scared that saying something would only make it worse. Lunchtime ended, and it was time for recess. I said bye and told Mr. Darren that I'd see him after school, and then we headed outside. The moment that we got to the playground, Ashley confronted me and said, "Daddy likes you. Now we have to move again." I had no clue what she meant by that, but she stormed off before I could ask her anything. Then I saw Mr. Darren by the trees, just outside the playground. That was weird. Parents weren't allowed to join during recess, and all these red flags started to go up. I didn't know what was wrong, just that it was bad and that I shouldn't go over there. He was continuously calling me though, and had something in his hands. I really didn't want to be rude, so I walked over anyways. He said he had a present for me, and gave me this pretty shiny pink wrapped box. I opened it, and guess what was inside? A color-changing Little Mermaid doll. I was extremely excited, but something in the back of my mind was telling me that this whole situation was bad. There was something important about this doll. I just didn't know what. He then proceeded to lean over and whisper to me,
I remember how much you wanted this one.
This confused me because I knew that I'd never mentioned the doll before to Mr. Darren. Honestly, I'd forgotten about it, and that's when things clicked. I dropped the doll and began to take a few steps back. I guess he noticed this because he began to try to reassure me. He then told me not to worry because he was going to buy me all the Barbies I wanted, and that he was going to take me home tonight and I could be his little girl. That's when I turned and ran. I bolted straight to the teacher's bench, crying my eyes out. I was too scared to even talk, so they took me to the counselor's office. Even after the counselor calmed me down, I never told them the whole story. I did tell them that he scared me and told me that he was going to take me away that night. That was enough for the school to call the police and file a restraining order, not letting him on school grounds. In my mind, I was afraid that if I told them any more, my best friend Ashley would hate me. My parents took me home early that day, and my dad went over and told Darren that he was never allowed to come near me ever again. Ashley refused to speak to me the next day, and a week later, they moved. I've never heard or seen that family again. Looking back, I realized just how much danger I was in. I also have some heavy speculations that Ashley and Skylar, her older sister, may not have actually been Darren's children. I don't really know, and I never told my parents the whole story. I often wonder if anything would have changed if I even did, but I still have nightmares to this day about him breaking into my room at night.